We're honored to welcome today's speakers back to her hometown today, and in fact, whenever she can make it. It's fair to say that she is one of our more worldly guests, and her talk today is of profound relevance. Jill has had, from her high school days, a passionate interest in Russia. She has spent a great deal of time there with CNN. In fact, we first met in Moscow. At this time, under the guidance of its president, Vladimir Putin, Russia has entered Ukraine with the goal of owning it. The ruthless destruction that he has caused in the process is unspeakable, unforgivable. Jill knows Russia and its leaders like the back of her hand. We are fortunate to have her here today to help us understand the situation. If it isn't war, what should we call it? Please welcome Jill to the podium.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Sandra. I'm going to use this microphone so I can kind of move around a little bit, but I forgot to put it on, so let me do that while I'm talking a little bit. But it is really wonderful to be back and to see friends and relatives, and also, oddly enough, today is my father's birthday. He would have been 100 and something. Vince Dougherty, who was also a local boy, and he was in charge of the FBI here back in the 60s, I guess 60s and 70s. So it's to me very significant. Whoops. Yikes! Where did he come from? He pops up in the most amazing places and invades spaces that you don't expect. So anyway, but no, it's fantastic. And it's a great turnout. I know we have 2 speakers today. Looking forward to the whole afternoon. And I just wanted to, begin with the war. I know I'm going to talk about the media, and that's one of the subjects that is very important to me. But I think the war, this invasion of Ukraine is, I think, a major historic moment that we're in. I grew up in the Cold War, probably a number of people here did. And so that was kind of the template, World War II, then the Cold War. And what we are in right now is changing the equation in many, many ways. I mean, just think about it. You have a major war in Europe right now, a major war. You have economic repercussions because of the war that are affecting the entire world. Globalization is being affected, trade is being affected. Then you have, and inflation, the global production chains are being affected. Then you have, let's say, the political side of it, geopolitical. You have NATO growing. Who would have thought, a year ago that Finland would be part of NATO? And now Sweden probably will be not so long from now. And then you have, I'd say, you have kind of the information space. And that intrigues me very much because I was a journalist. I kind of still am to a certain extent. And so the information space is changing. And as we're speaking, I would love as many questions as possible. So I'll speak for 20, 30 minutes at the most, and then we can have questions. I can always go back to talking if need be, because I like to talk. But anyway, I just think that this is affecting so many different. Migration. I should mention migration. You have millions of Ukrainians who have been displaced from their homes, some internally displaced, some becoming refugees going to Poland and the surrounding areas. We also, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in detail, people who have fled the country, who are journalists, who have fled because Putin is destroying independent media, and they have fled to a variety of countries. So if you're looking at the statistics for how many people have left Russia, it is easily 2 million people, easily. And this is not this is really kind of usually people who fled for a purpose, not just pushed out of their homes, but leaving for a particular purpose. For example, mobilization to get more men into the army led to an increase in people leaving the country. Again, the numbers are kind of all over the place, but you had, it could be close to 1 million people leaving because of that. Some of them have come back. But so you have this, huge shifts in people from Ukraine, plus the decimation of Ukraine right now, which we see on our television screens every day. Just, this morning, it was 19 people when I woke up in an apartment building. It is now something like 21 who died just this morning, from bombing. People who are living in an apartment, like a building out there, and then all of a sudden it's bombed, and they're dead. It's unfathomable sometimes. But I wanted to talk about the other part of this, and I'll kind of have two themes: the war, and then also and what that's doing to Ukraine, but also what the war is doing to Russia itself. And I think that's really important to talk about, because we see the devastation in Ukraine, but the internal situation in Russia is increasingly militarized. I mean, I'll give you some examples. This morning, every day I wake up, there is something new. So this morning, I wake up, and there is a report that President Putin has given an order to create museums across Russia. And these museums are going to be, guess what, to the war. And they're going, look it up. It just broke this morning. So there are going to be all of these museums, kind of like World War II museums, but this will be to the glory of the invasion of Ukraine, which in President Putin's mind is a pawn of the West, a pawn of NATO, a pawn of the United States. Essentially, this is all in quotes, of course, a fascist neo-Nazi country that is, I guess, maybe 6 months ago, it was the boogeyman, but now it's NATO and the United States. So it has turned into an existential battle for Putin. And in his, I would say, megalomaniacal way, he wants to, I'm sorry, Brooke has to put in her password again. I'm sorry. I'll keep hitting that so it doesn't. We were a little challenged by getting this up, but I'm not going to talk about turtles. Do not worry. So, but anyway, oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay. All right, now onward. So let's start with the main characters. Okay, we have this story of the war. We all know who this is, Vladimir Putin. I don't think we have to say too much, although I would just kind of put a little footnote to be talked about. Putin's ideology of his Putinism, what he thinks about the world and how the world functions. It was always very broad. In the old Soviet days, there was Marxism-Leninism, which we all know about. And it was a very defined ideology and an idea of the world. And you could, look it up. There were books, Marxism-Leninism. Then when Putin comes in, well, Yeltsin, the previous president, first independent president, couldn't really come up with an ideology. He couldn't come up with an idea for what modern Russia really was. Now, he had a lot of challenges, war in Chechnya, deteriorating, economy falling apart. So they could never really put together an ideology. And they actually had a commission of kind of graybeards who were put together, and they said, we need an ideology for modern Russia. And after a year, they disbanded because they couldn't do it, which is, I think, kind of interesting. So Putin comes in and begins to create this ideology of Russia, modern Russia, which is, he's, I would say, a little dose of Tsarism, Great country, 1,000-year history, Christian country, high culture, all of that, which is absolutely legitimate. Then he takes Soviet times, which I would, pare down to Russia saved the world in World War II. And unfortunately, they don't seem to think that Americans or anybody else had much to do with it. When I would get into, my father was in World War II, and he served in the Pacific Theater. And I would say, yeah, my father was, in the Philippines and China and everything. And they say, the Pacific Theater? What was that? Because it's all for them. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Russia. I mean, really, they had devastating losses, and millions of Russians died. But I'm just saying, what used to be kind of a more we won it together has now turned into Russia did it on its own. And in fact, there is a slogan for this war. They have several, which is, we can do it again. So he has brought back World War II, and we can do it again has actually turned into, even if, and this is literally what they are saying on Russian state TV, if you are 21 years old and you're fighting in Ukraine and you die, that's actually okay because you are dying for the fatherland. I mean, it's perverse. And I think I'll talk about this later, but I think it's stealing the futures of a lot of young Russians. So we can talk about that. So the second character, of course, Mr. Zelensky. And I think he's a fascinating person. We all know some of his background. He's a comedian by trade. Used to do a show on TV that was about a guy who mistakenly kind of becomes the president of Ukraine. So it's an odd, Donald Trump was a reality TV, but this is like really amazing. And in the beginning of the invasion, which was back in February 24th of last year, the United States actually offered him to be extracted because they knew that the Russians were going to try to come in and kill him, assassinate him. And he said no, which is really, to me, an amazing moment. Thank you, but no. And he went on the street. I remember this video. He took his cell phone, and now he's very canny about, PR. So he takes his cell phone and he walks down the main street doing a selfie and says, I'm here. And he didn't have a flak jacket or a helmet or anything. He just said, I'm here. And so Ukrainians looked at that and thought, well, if our president is here, maybe we can fight. And we all know if he had not done that, Ukraine would not be a country. I'm convinced Ukraine would not be a functioning country today, and it would be somehow part of Russia, whether overtly or indirectly, covertly, but it would not be a country the way it is right now. Then we also remember Zelensky just reminding people of coming to the United States. He's very good, as I said, on PR, and which is not to take anything away from him, because he needs it. So he's been able to parlay that into a lot of support from the West, which has reached billions and billions of dollars. One of the questions now is, it's hard to sustain a war. It's hard to sustain the fighting just physically because a lot of people are dying. Some of the best young Ukrainians are dying, and young Russians are dying too because of Putin. But I think, one of the questions for Americans will be, will we continue to support Ukraine in the war? And there are forces that, of course, say, no, we can't. So that will be a debate. So I went to Moscow in February of 2022, right before the invasion, because CNN, but I used to work for them for 30 years. And although I'm now in the world of academia, they send me back, as kind of like an analyst or whatever. So they said, we know there's going to be an invasion or something, we're pretty sure something was going to happen. U.S. government was saying that there will be an invasion. The Russians were saying, invasion? You have to be kidding. We would never do that. And so, of course, they invade. So they sent me to Moscow. So I was there for the invasion, and then up to March 6th, when they passed a law in the parliament which said you cannot call the war a war. You may remember that law. You know, any information that came from anything outside of the military, you could end up 15 years in prison for spreading that type of propaganda or fake news. So I was doing live shots. Here you see the live shot position. And then March 5th, that's the day that they passed the law. And I was scheduled to do live shots. So I came into the bureau, and I was doing the overnight schedule, which is from like midnight until 8 o'clock in the morning, roughly. And everything was canceled because of that law, because we didn't know. Like, if I say the word on air, war or invasion or just anything that they didn't like, could I be arrested? You know, would they come into the CNN bureau? There was grave concern. So the company actually we decided that everybody had to be pulled out or, you know, leave. So I had to, it was kind of strange because I ended up going to Dubai, you know, just trying to get a ticket because Russians were leaving at that point too. So it was harder and harder to get tickets. But this is an important moment, at least in my life. And I think I might have mentioned this the last time I was here. And that's where some of my friends who were talking about this is the last picture that I took in the bureau. So everybody went home to pack. And this is a bureau where I had spent almost a decade as the bureau chief. So it was very personal to me. So I walked through the bureau late at night. Nobody was there. And I was the one who put that carpeting in, actually, with the CNN, you know. So it was kind of, so there I am. And I thought, and I never do real selfies, you know. And so I thought, I'm going to do a selfie because I don't know if I'll ever be back. And we were talking about this right before lunch. I don't know that I will ever be back to Russia, which pains me very much because I've been involved in, you know, Russia, the language, the culture, and everything since I was a freshman in Central High School here in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And to think that I would never go back to that country is very hard for me. I mean, in spite of what Putin is doing, I'm very interested and drawn to that country. I have friends, and I don't know whether I'll ever be able to go back. So that picture, that may be, you know, for me, the last time I'm in Moscow. Just look, Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter, was arrested about a month ago and charged with espionage, which was ridiculous. So anyway, so I talked about kind of the militarization, and I think it's important to understand what Putin is doing. I mean, every aspect of the country right now is being militarized. So you have, obviously, wartime economy. They're trying to make more weapons. They're trying to make more tanks. They're not doing very well at that because the components for modern weapons today are, digital and high tech. And a lot of the components come from the West. But now with sanctions, they can't get these components. So they're having difficulty making modern weapons. So they're just putting out whatever they've got. In fact, some of the weapons are almost from World War II. Some of the tanks, they're not even sophisticated tanks. So this is, I would say, militarily, economically, they are now on a wartime footing. And they also have changed the educational system. And this was kind of coming. This started, I'd say, back in like 2012 maybe, but it really picked up steam. All across Russia, they now have required courses for young people to take. And it starts in grammar school and goes all the way up to college. So it's Russian history, how great Russia is, how superior to other cultures Russia is, how not an individualistic country. It is a country united, where, forget about Western individualism and all of that. We are united as a country, and getting back to that kind of high culture, Also moral values. Now the gay propaganda law is just incredible. Any type of dissent has been essentially wiped out. I'll give you a couple of examples. This is really a shocking one. It even shocked some Russians. So there was a father who was divorced from the mother. I'm not quite sure why, but he was raising his daughter on his own. His daughter is like 8 or 9, and he is against the war. But he's not a public figure. He was just at home talking about the war. So his little girl goes to school, and they have art class, and they say, little Anna or whatever, make a drawing. So she makes a drawing, and it says, "No to war." And the teacher goes to the principal and says, this little girl did an anti-war drawing. I wonder who her father is. So the police go to her father, and they try to arrest him. He flees to Belarus, which is not a good place to flee to, because it's like from the frying pan into the fire. So he's arrested in Belarus, extradited back, and meanwhile, what happens to the daughter? The police or whoever was in charge go to the mother, and the mother said, "I don't want her." So they put her into an orphanage. They put her into a children's home. I mean, this is really, it's one of the most shocking things. So they put her in this children's home, and then finally, even some of the most rabidly pro-war people begin to say, this is too much. So they eventually got the mother, forced her to take the daughter. And now it's kind of unclear what's going to happen. The father, was arrested, could be sentenced. I don't know how this is all going to end. But this is the level. And there was another case as well. I mean, every day there's something like this. A young couple in a restaurant having a conversation saying, boy, this war is terrible. Somebody overhears them at the next table and calls the police and says, there's some anti-war people here who are talking about the war. The police come in. There's video of this. Police come in, put them face down on the floor, and arrest them. People are arrested for tweeting, well, not even tweeting, texting friends against the war. So what I'm saying is this has gone way beyond just like Vietnam War, we hate the war. This is now Stalinist repression. And when I say this, I used to be I will call it mild-mannered about Russia. I mean, I kind of understood in the beginning of Putin, he was doing some reforms and all of that. But this is a level of repression that is almost worse than the Soviet Union, because he is the only person who's in charge. In the Soviet Union, you had a Politburo. You had a number of people. And sometimes, after Stalin died, they decided that he was a monster, and they had de-Stalinization. But with Putin, there's no one who's saying de-Putinization, except for people who fled the country. So anyway, onward. But it's pretty bad. So after Moscow, I go back to D.C. It's now May, and I go usually, this is Tallinn, Estonia. So every year, in fact, on May 9th, in just about 10 days or whatever, I'll go back for a yearly security conference. And now that the war has begun, a lot of people have fled. A lot of journalists have fled to Tallinn, Riga, Latvia, and Vilnius, Lithuania. 3 of my favorite countries are very, very interesting. So I went there, and this is Riga. And in Riga, you will see that building behind. That is the Russian embassy, a beautiful building in a lovely part of town. And people are so incensed about the war in the Baltics that it gets worse. Wait till you see. So they put this up in front of the embassy so that the embassy can see what people think about Putin and the war. So this is kind of the beginning. And as I moved up the street, you can see the Ukrainian flag there, and the Ukrainian colors, yellow and blue. So This is what we see. And there are signs all over. There were signs that were literally as high as the ceiling there. So look at some of these. I mean, Putin is a rat. Actually, I once, when I was in Libya, I did a photojournalism thing on images of autocratic leaders and things like that. The rat is often the symbol. They did that with Gaddafi. There was a lot of graffiti, and they used almost the same thing, except that he has a nuclear missile on his head, because that, of course, is the one great power that Russia has. And down in the right, I won't necessarily read it, but you see the F word, and they call him now Putler, as in Hitler. So that's one. Going on, this is even better. Look at this, Mr. Cadaver. Just really, really, Yuda Yeda on the left, that word over there on the left, it's, what is it called? When people who eat, not vampires, but who are the people? Cannibals, yes, cannibals. So, these are not exactly friendly things. And then some in English, the truth will prevail and Putin will fail. So in the Baltic nations, all three of them, and I'll get to this in a second, the image of Putin is really bad. I know in Scranton, PA, there are a lot of people from that region. I knew Lithuanians when I was growing up. And so, there is a reason that they have always feared Russia, because many people, like in Estonia, thousands of people were deported to Siberia, where they died, either in transit or eventually died. And I'll show you a picture in a second of a prison, KGB prison, that is now a museum in Riga. And so people there, when I was at that conference, which is now 2 months after the war begins, I'll tell you, the mood was, we told you so. We told you so. And you didn't think it was that bad, but now you see. So now this is the image. This is the interesting thing, because this, of course, is a Russian image. This is a T-shirt in a store. It's from a couple of years ago. But the image of this guy, young, buff, take over the world. Putin doesn't look like that anymore. He's kind of an older guy, kind of like my age. And, so in Riga and in Latvia and Lithuania, I also talked to journalists. This is one of the last journalists who remains in Russia, but they had to shut down. This is called Echo Moscow Radio. This guy's name is Venediktov, Alexei Venediktov, and he was, he's really famous. It's like a news radio. He had to shut down. He is now on the web. There are other people. I went to a studio. You can see these two people worked for Echo Moscow and some other independent organizations. This was taken in Vilnius, where they set up, and they're now going to YouTube. So YouTube has become kind of the TV of, actually, I would say, of the world. So everybody that I know has a YouTube channel. These people did too. They had a camera over here and a green screen, and they would have a discussion. And a lot of Russian journalists are now living in the West. So one of the questions is, are the Russians who are home still listening to them? And because they're really telling the truth in Russian, so it's very effective. But it's, I don't know what the future will be. A lot of them fled thinking that maybe this will be over in a year or two, and it's not. So we don't know. So there they are, Sasha, both of them. They're great journalists and friends. Now, I do not want to believe me, I'm not going to talk about Donald Trump, because we've talked about that enough. But I will say that this picture of, Tucker Carlson, who disappeared a few days ago from Fox TV. If you look at the right top corner, I took this picture not on American television, I took it on Russian television. This is Россия 24, so Russia 24. It's like a cable, 24-hour news. And you see down at the bottom, so this is Russian TV, and this is Tucker Carlson was, until a few days ago, on Russian TV almost every single day. Not as a broadcaster, but what he said about the war in Ukraine, about Biden, about the economy, about America, was literally put on Russian TV. So I'm bringing this up because to me it's shocking. And you look at the severe cost. None of this benefits America in any way. So there is a mirroring, I call it cross-fertilization, between Russian propaganda and American propaganda, and really world propaganda. You could even say Chinese propaganda. It's like a swirl of information. You can no longer say that propaganda is one directional, we send a message, they deny it, etc. It's all a big swirling mess of propaganda. And so what Tucker was saying, I thought, that sounds familiar. Oh, because Putin said it. I'm serious. Tucker would say things that Putin said, or at least were on Russian TV. And then Russian TV would say, hey, this American journalist, this influential American journalist, is saying this. So they would echo what he said, but it was an echo chamber, if you know what I mean. It's kind of the same message. So I think we have to be very aware that in debates about Russian propaganda, it's kind of a two-way multiple street. Now, this is a torture chamber. This a little out of sequence. This is in Lithuania, KGB prison, torture chamber. I was stunned after I went there. Again, the Baltics, a lot of the countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union that remember Stalin, etc., and the KGB, they have been warning us about what Putin would do. So anyway, back in Washington, this is the fantastic ambassador, Markarova, for Ukraine. And she's been doing a great job going around the country, very, active in talking with people around the country and trying to spread the message of why they think they need help from the West. And that's that's their military attaché, really nice guy. This is an odd thing. When I talk about the image of Putin, this is a tweet. So at the top, I'll just read it. It's a picture. You see this picture of Putin, and it is done like a Russian icon. Like this part of it is kind of like the saint, and his face is elongated to look like a Russian icon. So this, and you can read up there perhaps, icons with Putin were sent to the mobilized. So soldiers got this recently. And it says, such gifts for Easter were made by United Russia, which is his political party. One of the Perm, people mobilized from the city of Perm, told us about what happened. Now he is in the Zaporizhia direction. So it's a little funky translation, but this guy's fighting for the Russians in Zaporizhia, and they all were given this wonderful icon of President Putin. So the image has actually, from that kind of macho man Putin, now he is literally a saint. He's literally a saint with a holy war against the godless West. They actually call the West Satanism. I mean, Satanists, literally, quote, Satanists. So anyway, now I wanted to close because I really want to get questions. I should be looking at the time here, but this is the old days. I hope you can't recognize me because I have the worst haircut that I think I've ever had in my life. But I'm on the bottom right next to Mr. Peregrine, and I will get to him in a second. And my twin sister Pam is on the far right in front. Pamela, who also went into Russian studies and continued and actually got a PhD. So we were hooked on Russia in high school. And it always feels very fitting to come back here. I know Scranton Central doesn't exist anymore, but It does in my mind. And then this is Mr. Peregrine, Michael Peregrine, now deceased, but with his absolutely wonderful wife, Pat. And Mr. Peregrine is the guy who created the Russian courses at Scranton Central High School. And I'm actually writing a book, and I hope it will get published, but I'm actually writing it. And he's in there as kind of like, it's a memoir slash nonfiction book, because I reported on the guy, on Putin for nearly a decade, and I still do. So, it's kind of the story of the Cold War, and Mr. Peregrine was actually a recipient of some of the U.S. government funding for critical languages. I know a lot of people here know about that during the Cold War, that the United States government, very freaked out by the space race and Sputnik, decided to put a lot of money into the study of foreign languages. And Mr. Peregrine, native Russian speaker though, who was 24 at the time or something like this, very young when he taught us, he was a recipient, and Pam and I were. So there was a lot of help to study critical languages, which gave me my career. So I always want to remember Mr. Peregrine, who literally gave me my career. There he is with Pat, and I think I have a picture. Oh yeah, there we are. I interviewed him a year before he died, so he's very much in the book and telling amazing stories of the early days of studying Russian. So maybe we'll end on that. How are we doing on time? Let's see. What time is it? 10. Yikes. Okay. Let's open it up to questions, and then maybe 10, 15 minutes at the most, Sandra? 10? 10 minutes. Okay. All right. 10 minutes. Yes, sir. Oh, I think we have a microphone, if that makes it easier.
Yeah. One of Mr. Peregrine's sayings, when you'd ask him why we did this, he always would say it's because the first Russian did it that way. I don't know if you remember that. He always, things never quite change. And you've gone over a lot of the history. Russia's had 300 years of czarist authoritarianism, followed by a very brief window of freedom, followed by Bolshevik, Leninist authoritarianism, followed by Stalinist authoritarianism, followed by the Politburo authoritarianism, followed by the Yeltsin period, and now we're into the Putin authoritarianism. He may have thought himself another Peter the Great and winds up as Ivan the Terrible. But, it seems that the natural political way of Russia is authoritarianism. No matter how much the people suffer, no matter how much grief it's brought them, they always seem to revert to that, and Putin knows how to push the buttons to allow him to continue this. The people who don't want it leave, which only strengthens the people, strengthens the authoritarianism.
Right.
When Putin's gone, eventually he will be gone. Is there any real hope that they're not going to revert? Somebody else isn't going to use the Putin playbook or the Tsarist playbook or the Stalinist playbook?
Yeah, that's a great question. My concern is, remember I talked about the education system being changed so that I think what we've got now is if Putin disappeared and they hadn't changed the system, but the system is now being militarized, and little kids who are like 10 years old are learning the things that Putin is saying. So my concern is, how are they going to unwash their little brains? How's that going to change? So I'm very concerned that moment, actually under Yeltsin, you could say under Yeltsin, in the early days of Yeltsin, chaotic as it was, there was an opening and there was a chance for the media. But now I'm very concerned that we're going to be into authoritarianism. Yes, sir.
When President Biden made his trip, to Ukraine.
Biden to Ukraine, yes.
If I remember correctly, the White House refused to offer any insight into the discussions between the president and Zelensky. Has that information been released since then, or have you heard anything from sources that would indicate what kind of pressure, if any, Biden has tried to exert out of the public view on Zelensky to wrap the war up short of the victory that I think Zelensky wants?
Yeah, good question. Those conversations usually are, there are things that will be talked about, weapons, etc. But that sensitive subject of the United States influencing Zelensky to end the war, it's very sensitive because Zelensky has to live with his voters eventually. And Ukrainians right now are furious at Russia and do not want to even give up any of the land that has been taken from Russia. So I think, as far as I would understand, I think probably the United States has expressed concern about the war, but I doubt that they are saying wrap it up, because I don't think Zelensky would accept that, number one. And I don't think, even if he did, I don't think the Ukrainian people would. And it's not really our place to tell them what they're going to do. I know we provide weapons, but I don't think we can tell them precisely. I think we can help if there's a way of having some type of peace agreement. I think the United States should try to foster that. But right now, there's no sign of peace. There just isn't, from either side. Yes, please.
Thank you. If Putin were to perish tomorrow, highly unlikely, but if that happened, would his successor continue to pursue the war in Ukraine, or would it behoove that individual to, perhaps let that go?
Yeah, it's a great question. If he dies tomorrow, his prime minister becomes the president. His prime minister is a capable bureaucrat, very boring. So I do not think, no, seriously, he's not a political animal. So I do not think that he would be elected in a way of, popular. Obviously, he'd be elected if they wanted him to be elected. But in a way, he's not Putin, So, however, I think that we are probably going to look at a period of some political chaos, in which all sorts of factions are going to be fighting with each other for power. And there are some Russians who believe the war is a mistake. Some business people think that it is a mistake. Maybe some of the military think that it is a mistake because it's not going well. And the KGB, or the FSB, essentially, the security forces are the ones who assured Putin that it would be a cakewalk. So I think I'm very fearful, actually, of what will happen, much as it's probably desirable that he disappear from the scene. But I do think it could be very unstabilizing and kind of scary for the world at that period. I don't think it's going to be good news either. Yes.
How strong is the Wagner group as far as politics is concerned?
Fascinating group. I know we're really rushing here, but Wagner Group is a military, a private military contractor, very close to the Kremlin. They are important. They are fighting in Ukraine. And a lot of them, the career people in Wagner, the professionals, are actually quite good. But Wagner, it's spelled Wagner, have taken people out of prisons and said, you fight in Ukraine, you get your sentence removed. So there are a lot of people who are just prisoners with no military training, who are just being used like human waves, and they're dying. But I can tell you, Wagner is not important only because it's a military contractor. It also, and I was talking with a guy last night, an Africa expert about this, Wagner has penetrated Africa. So they are involved in blood diamonds, extraction of precious metals, etc., bringing huge amounts of money to the Kremlin. So Wagner is criticizing the military, and some people would say, why does Putin allow him to criticize the military? But because I think money, and they're kind of balancing. Putin likes to balance factions, and so I think military, you'll behave better, show your colors better if you are under a little bit of pressure. So he lets Wagner do it. It's a short version of a very long discussion. Yes, Maury?
What is the present and future relationship between Russia and China and Russia and India?
Oh, wow. Good. Fantastic. Russia, well, in 2 sentences, much closer with China. But they need China desperately at this point for high-tech products. I don't think at this point that the Chinese are going to give lethal weapons, or at least a lot of lethal weapons, to Russia for Ukraine. But I would say that Russia knows that China is far bigger, far richer, and more powerful than Russia is, except for the nuclear weapons. And so they have to make sure that they're not kind of eaten up by the Chinese. India, I think India is kind of vacillating. Energy is often at the source of that because they know that they can get energy from Russia. Russia's biggest exports, the biggest part of their budget is energy, oil, gas, etc. Is that, it's shorthand. Sorry to be shorthanding, but we don't have any really time. Yes, sir.
What do you make of the reports that we hear frequently about Putin's health?
My favorite question. I'm sure the CIA knows. No, really, truly, I'm sure that they know. They know more than I do. But I don't think he's dying. He may have some sort of, some people think that he has like a little Parkinson's or something. Sometimes he looks a little puffy. Almost like steroid type puffiness. So he could have something wrong with him. But I do not think he is, unfortunately, I don't think that he is actually, about to keel over and die. Yes, physically and maybe mentally. Do we have any more time or is that it?
Well, take one.
There's just one more with this lady down here, if we can, yeah?
It's a truism, but we're fighting in Ukraine, so we're not actually fighting. If he goes further, there's Moldova, the Baltics, and all of that. Do you believe that if there's a peace deal struck, say like North Korea, South Korea, he keeps what he's taken already, he's not going to stop there, is he?
I don't think Putin, if you heard that, I don't think that Putin, let's say that he wins in Ukraine, you're saying? Okay, let's say that he wins. Yeah, or even slices off what he's got. Okay, so I don't think that he will invade. He might do, but he'll obviously do something in Moldova because it's a small country and it's already got a breakaway region. I do not think that he's going to invade NATO countries because he would be crazy if he did that because he would lose. But it's you never can say never. But I do think what he will do is he will continue to undermine countries in that region and any country that he feels could be useful to him. I think it would be a constant source of undermining, corrupting, buying politicians, taking over countries in an economic sense, a political economic sense. And so, former Soviet countries have to be very wary of that because that is his modus operandi. Look what he did to Moldova. And it's not only he did it, the president of Moldova, Lukashenko, did it too. But this is the problem. Maybe I'll sum up with this, that I think we really have to reevaluate the relationship with Russia because they do believe that they are now at war with the West. And so when you're at war, anything is fair game. And that includes everything from kinetic military action to propaganda, media undermining, etc. So I hate to think that we're back to kind of Soviet days. It's different. It's not the Soviet Union. But we are not just competitors. We are now, certainly in their eyes, we are enemies. That said, I think, we have to be very realistic about what he's doing. But we can't stop talking with them. Cutting off communication. I think we have to constantly Communicate to make sure we don't blow each other up. That's number one. Continue with nuclear agreements as much as we can, which are really, falling as we speak, and try to deconflict in these zones, like the planes. You've seen drones and planes almost hitting each other, very dangerous, and try to communicate, but to be very realistic and very tough with them, because they're tough. They are tough, and they're steeling themselves to be as tough as they can, because Putin believes that the West is out to get him. And if you believe the West is out to get you, you're going to take all measures to keep your system going. So that's, I guess, on that jolly note, I would end. But it's thank you. Thank you.
How lucky we are that we've had you reporting to us about Russia, because it is a mystery. It is a mystery.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate your being here.
Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah.